Alright guys, welcome to part 3 of the Benoni Standard Plans. Alright, so in this video, I'm gonna speak about different ideas. One of them is if they stop our C4 idea, which we talked about a lot in the second video. And also a secondary idea which does not involve playing on the queen side. So let's get into this position that we have in front of us here. So here in this position, white stopped our c4 plan by playing bishop to c4, which stops our idea of going c4 and knight c5, which black was threatening. Alright? So here, black rook b8, but we still want to continue with our plan of going for b5 and continue to plow on the queen side. Right? So queen c2. This is a little passive, doesn't really help in the fight for the queen side. Knight b6. Trying to harass this bishop. Bishop f1. And also making way. So not only is it harassing the bishop, but it's also making way for us to develop our bishop to d7 in order to support our ambitions of going for b5. So bishop to d7, rook to b1, knight a8. Of course, with the idea of going pawn to b5, as we know by now is our main calling card in the Benoni structure. Another thing I wanted to note as well, after bishop d7, we don't mind if he plays pawn to a5, because then we can go knight to c8 with the idea of going knight a7, knight b5. Alright, that's just a side note to mention there. So in this position, knight a8, the idea is we want to go for b5 in this position, as we always do. Bishop to d1, and now we're finally getting our b5 idea. So coming back to the initial position, right, he stopped us from going for our c4 and knight c5 idea, but we still want to play on the queen side, so we still make the necessary steps in order to get this b5 move in. Alright, and after the b5 move comes in, b5, pawn takes, bishop takes, trying to get rid of the light square bishop. Remember, we said before that the light square bishop in Benoni structures don't really have a purpose. Bishop takes b5, a takes b5, pawn to b4, just to stop us from playing b4 ourselves. He goes pawn to b4. But now we go knight d7, rook e c1, pawn to c4, and with this pass pawn, great bishop, and eventually we're gonna get this knight back into the game. We should have a very clear advantage here for black. Alright, so in this position here, we want to play pawn to c4, which gives us a pawn sacrifice. Now this is a pawn sacrifice, temporary sacrifice, because after the bishop takes on c4, it allows us to play knight takes e4, which gives us the chance to trade one of our wing pawns for white's central pawn, which is typical because if he loses this pawn on e4, then we also weaken this pawn on d5. And now the benefit of this exchange is that we also activate our pieces. So knight takes, rook takes, and now great bishop, great rook down the line, nice square for our knight to go to, and eventually our pieces are going to activate and cause dynamic problems for our opponent. Alright, so we're gonna look at this last position, or last idea I should say, here, where we try to go for, where in these lines black tries to go for f7 to f5 to open lines on the king side instead of playing on the queen side exclusively. f7 f5 is another way to play in the modern Benoni. It's possible that this advance is like often very good for black, right? But the main problem is that white is usually on his way to play like e4, e5 typically. So you have to make sure that you time f5 under the right circumstances. So here in this position, black plays knight f to e8. So knight f to e8 with the idea to go for f5. Knight c4. Pawn to f5. And pawn to f3. Now here, white played f3 so that he's able to maintain the structure of his pawns. Because as we said, if e takes f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes f5, and then we're able to activate our good light square bishop, and he's also having this weakness here on d5. The air f3 was good to maintain the structure. Here, black plays queen to e7 to maintain pressure on the e4 pawn. Because we're combining with the fact that we have pressure along to the bishop, to the knight on c3, it means that this pawn is under significant pressure once we add the queen to it. Bishop to f4. And now, so as white wants to put additional pressure on our pawn on d6. But now we can play pawn to g5, which is another typical move in the Benoni to gain more space on the king side. So now we're switching gears. So bishop back to g3, pawn to f4, gaining more space, bishop to f2, and now b6. So one of the ideas with b6, as we've seen, if you watch the first part of the Benoni series, you realize that one of the main thorns in our side is this knight on c4. Also, another problem piece that we have is the bishop on c8. So we don't abandon those ideas. We try to include them at different points in the middle game. So here, the main idea of b6 is to play bishop a6 to trade the knight on c4. So rook e1, bishop a6, And then we're going to trade the knight, have more control over the central dark squares, and then eventually even go for b5, rook b8, and b5 ideas. All right. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this Benoni series. If you like this video, please click like and also subscribe for my next opening series